gals. This is Gretel and Michaelin on an episode about VMCAS. So application season is in full swing and we want to make sure you are all prepared to be successful. So Michaelin and I worked very hard and we got in on our first cycle. So today we have some tips and tricks and also a general explanation of VMCAS.
Yeah, we're just going to start with kind of a breakdown of what VMCAS is, and then we'll get into the actual application, some tips and tricks like Gretel said, and just really breaking down everything except for the intro, like demographic aspect that you can fill out yourself. So to start, VMCAS, VMCAS, is the Veterinary Medical College Application Service. And VMCAS allows you to apply to any college in the United States other than Texas schools. And it also allows you to apply to, I think, a good bit of the accredited international schools, like Ross University, I know is on there. I know that the Royal Veterinary College in London is in there, a couple things like that. So unless you're applying to a Texas school, this should be the application service that you're using. And the general timeline, I don't remember when it opened this year, but it should have opened in January. I know that last year when we submitted ours, the program applications opened May 9th, and that is essentially where you actually choose which schools you'll be applying to and look at the supplemental essays. When it opens in January, it's just the general, you can input your transcripts, you can input anything like your demographics, and you can start writing your essay, but you can't start doing the supplemental essays and questions for specific schools until May. And this year it looks like it's due September 15th. So Gretel, would you like to start talking about what you should do before it opens? Research, drafting essays, how to track your hours.
Definitely. Well, the hardest part, I would say, is choosing what schools to apply to and understanding that applying to 15 and above does not make your chances greater. It's best to run the numbers on what range really works for you. So when I was applying, I looked at GPAs, average GPAs, which aren't always followed, just so you know. But am I in their range of normally accepted students first? Also, a lot of schools, it's not just the VMCAS fee. They have separate fees of around $100 each. So per school, think of it being around $150 to $200 in total. So Michaelin, how many schools did you apply to? I applied to 8.
I applied to 12 because I had very low confidence in my ability to get in, a lot of self-doubts. Even though I knew your chances of getting into that individual school wouldn't necessarily increase, it seemed like I might as well increase my overall chances by applying to more schools, if that makes sense. But like Gretel said, it does not increase your chance of getting into a certain school. It's just, gives you more options. And I got into 3 out of the 12, so that's about 25%. And my only comment on applying to more is that you should definitely, I see a lot of people apply to certain schools and then they say, well, I don't actually want to go overseas, or I don't want to go here or here or here. So that's definitely something to consider before you choose your schools. Would you live there? For example, I applied only to schools in the South and then a couple international schools because I know that my family's from the North. I don't want to live in the North. I know what it's like. I don't know. I just wanted to stay in the South where I was comfortable. So I applied to 12 schools, or I guess 9 schools in the South, from Texas all the way over to Georgia, and then a couple international schools. And I also looked at, for example, I didn't apply to University of Florida because I didn't think that I fit their applicant profile. But I tried to apply to some that were out of reach in my mind, like Auburn, my undergrad institution, I knew probably wouldn't accept me, but I would have loved to go there. So I applied there and just gave it a shot. And I even applied the school that I'm going to, LSU. I didn't think I'd get in there based on their GPA, averages. But that is a good indicator of what they're looking for. So, Gretel, what were your considerations when you chose what schools you were applying to?
Mine were big on distance from home and how accessible it would be. So I mainly applied to Midwestern schools. I grew up in Missouri. I went to college in Illinois. It's what I know. It's what I love. And I have a family horse farm. So I didn't want to be too terribly far from that because I felt very far from it in college. And so I applied to the Midwestern schools. I looked at the GPA ranges. I considered financial aid as well, but a lot of schools I knew from the start were not going to supply like a great amount of help. So an out-of-state school, no matter what, was going to be more expensive. So I still applied anyway. Missouri, luckily I'm in state. Ohio State has relatively cheaper out-of-state costs. Iowa State is more expensive, but I knew they had a really strong equine program, and I worked for vets. Actually, every school that I worked for a vet who had gone there, I got into. So I got into 4, which I talked about in my interview. So if I knew they had a great experience there and I had a personal reference, it really helped a lot. And if we've worked with them, it definitely helps, even though they don't interview you with people that know you. They keep it very, very separate. The program I ended up going with was a 2-2, and that was always favorable to me, but there are only 2 like that in the country. I believe that's Mississippi State and University of Missouri. So if you're looking for that, you really only have 2 options. And if you're looking for cheaper out-of-state, Missouri and Ohio State are some of your best bets. International schools, I have, now 3 horses and a miniature donkey and a dog, and I just didn't see it being realistic for my life. I have worked for vets internationally for a couple weeks at a time, and I've always been longing to go back home. So that's why I was like, I'm only going to apply to schools in the US. Like Ross would never have been realistic for me, so I didn't apply. But for a lot of people, it's an amazing option. So, Michaelin, do you want to start us on the application breakdown as well?
So we talked about picking schools, application breakdown.
Definitely look at how many out-of-state spots they take, because like North Carolina, for instance, only takes around 20 out of state, and Wisconsin, Madison takes like 30, at least when we applied. And so your chance from out of state just went to 1 or 2%. That's realistic. So when you're in state applying, you have 10 times the chance of when you're out of state. So if you are mainly applying to out of state, you really need to make your application stand out and know that there's a huge difference between a 1% acceptance rate and a 4 or 5% acceptance rate.
I would totally agree with that. That was something I looked into. I had a huge Excel sheet with, like I think pretty much all 30 schools in the US, and I really narrowed it down from there. I looked at their average GPA because as a lower GPA student with a 3.5, that was a big concern for me. I knew that severely lowered my chances of getting in a lot of places like Auburn. And so I really started looking at the average, experience hours or their average out of state acceptance. And I, came up with my top, I think I had it narrowed down to 15. I was so like indecisive. I was like, I don't want to cut down my chance. Like, what if the, school I'm cutting out right now is the one that would have accepted me? And that's exactly how it is. I was fortunate enough to be able to pay the fees to apply because unfortunately LSU might have been one of the first off my list because of their average GPA being a 3.8. And so I was like, oh, I'll never get in there. Anyway, whenever you look at out of state, like Gretel said, definitely check out their out of state acceptance rates. I know Tennessee was one of the highest when I applied, and LSU is probably getting up there now because they just accepted their first class of 200 as opposed to, most schools being 100, 150. And so their acceptance rate are going to go up, their GPA is going to go down just a tad, things like that. Things to look out for. Also, the class size is something considerable. Anyway, so once you get into the actual VMCAS application, it's going to start with some personal info, demographics, and we're not going to go too deep into that because, you know who your parents are, you know what your address is, etc. It's going to ask about your academic history. So it's going to go from high school onward. You're going to have to submit your high school transcript. It's going to ask you whether you took APs, things like that. And then it'll go into your high school and you can start getting into your transcripts. And that is a whole nother discussion in itself. There's a lot of confusion about whether you should pay for the PTE, the professional transcript entry. That's a question I see in the pre-vet groups every year. I fully entered my transcripts and then paid for PTE because I was so anxious about it being wrong. And I don't think they really changed anything on my application. So Gretel and I were talking earlier, maybe if you have a hard time, maybe it's better to make sure everything is entered correctly or have a friend proofread it if you would, things like that. If you don't want to pay for the PTE, I wouldn't say it's a necessity at all. It's a luxury, but honestly, I don't even know if they changed anything that I did. So after that, you're going to get into the supporting info, and this is the biggest part of the application other than the transcripts. It's going to ask you about your experiences, clinics you worked at, other employment, your community service, literally every detail about your life since, freshman year of high school. It's going to ask you about achievements and awards, whether you won a pre-vet award in your pre-vet club, things like that. And then it's going to go into essays, which we'll go over here in a second, your letters of recommendations, which we'll also talk about, and your personal statement. So Gretel, would you like to start talking about the personal statement next?
Definitely. I have a couple things to add on the application breakdown as well. So while your experiences are from high school and on, your transcripts are not. It's mainly your college transcripts. You also can submit AP credit, but you have to double check with the veterinary college that they take that credit for that class. So email them separately. When you're doing transcripts, order one. This is what I did. I spent the $8 from Parchment and I ordered one to myself because sometimes your unofficial transcript can have mistakes. Once you finish filling out your transcript portion, it needs to become verified, and this needs to be done weeks in advance from the deadline. September 15th, let's look back. I would get everything done a month in advance if possible and submit it. But verifying it can take over a week. I have personally met people who didn't get their transcript verified, submitted it the night of, and there was a mistake on it and their application never went through. And they had to wait an entire year. So transcripts, get it done, get out of the way. Order the official one to yourself online, double check everything. If you have questions about how to categorize classes to make sure they fulfill the requirements from the vet schools, email the vet school admissions offices, email your advisors. Do whatever you can to make sure that you're filling that out correctly is incredibly important. And for experiences, I had a method that I used. I used bullet points. I used the entire word count for most of it because they don't know it unless you tell them. And you need to show them that you're putting all your effort in possible. So fill it up to the max, show them your veterinary knowledge in your explanation. You don't have to explain to them what the procedure is, but explain to them how it taught you more about vet med or what experience and what skills you gained. Like even sweeping the floor. You could be like, help sanitize the environment so it can become cleaner for surgical operations. Like reword a simple task into something that shows your knowledge. Those are my biggest tips. And your essays, spend months on it. So now we're going to get into the personal statement, and this is what I mean, spend months on it. You do not necessarily have to sit down and write and edit this for months. You need to start with months of mental work. Because I know most of us were little kids and they said, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be a vet. While that's great, that doesn't get you into school. You need to know what you would add to the field. This is not your high school Common App essay. This is not like a sob story that you put in. If you mention your personal life, it's in a few sentences. This is an argument on why you need to become a veterinarian and all the amazing things you're going to do for the field. So what schools are looking for, they want something unique. And maybe you only went to a small animal clinic and you need to make yourself unique. Pick up a bunch of different experiences and try to wrap that into a major theme. Methods, what specifically makes you different from other candidates? Think of it. Are there any things that you've looked into that other people haven't? Like I had a small hobby horse farm that I built back from the ground up when I was 14. That shows resilience, that shows strength. Write down your best attributes and how that would make you a better veterinarian, and then look back in your life about all those moments where you showed courage and resilience. That is what they want. So no cliches. Don't say you want to be a vet because you love animals. That's the most popular tip that we hear. They don't want to hear about when you brought your dog into the vet and it was euthanized, and I'm so sorry to say it, but there are so many essays like that about how the vet handled them with grace. That's amazing, but they've heard it 10,000 times. So try to come up with something unique. I talked about being a quadruplet in mine to start off. I got them in with a hook. That was very different than normal because I'm like a fraction maybe of that. If there are even any other quadruplet applying this year, who knows? And how animals gave me my individuality and that I expanded my world through them. That was what my essay was about, and finding holistic medicine, improving welfare for horses, wanting to make change in the world. So Michaela and I were both on the APVMA board writing about that so we could expand opportunities for students. In any way that you showed strength, write it down. And that's how you should start your drafts. Make yourself unique. Michaela, what did you write about?
What I do remember is struggling a lot with the format of the essay. There's absolutely no guidance on especially because I grew up, going to state competitions in writing. I was like I need more specific instructions. Like it doesn't tell you if it should be narrative style, academic style. You don't know. And I don't think that they necessarily care. It's more like what style fits you best. And I would say if I were the one reading them, I haven't heard any admissions officers talk about the format specifically, but I know when we read for, scholarships and things like that, literally any writing, whether it's my friends or mine, I always am more drawn to a story with more of a narrative style, a little bit more like reading a storybook, but only for the hook kind of. And then you go into, the real life aspect of it. So I just kind of went in with that. I started with the hooks saying something, in the warm morning embrace of this restaurant I worked at. That was literally my opening sentence. And then I just talked about my experiences growing up in a very small town and how passionate I was about rural medicine and rural sociology in general. That was most of what my essay was about. I said, I tried to avoid the cliche of I want to give back to the community that gave so much to me. I don't want to hear that. As somebody from a rural town, if I was reading somebody else's essay, that's not what I want to see. It's, unoriginal, just something different. So I talked about the people that I was serving and not necessarily the animals because I grew up on a farm. I might have mentioned a sentence, that I grew up on a farm and I was in a livestock town. That might have been as much as I said about any experiences. Past that, I talked about the people that I served through their animals. I gave an example of the reason I started it with the restaurant is because I gave an example of when, one day I would go to work at 6 a.m. in the morning before school. And I had my favorite customers. They were called the coffee guys. And I talked about this one dog that would come to the restaurant every morning and eventually passed away. And I just went into how I handled the conversations around it, the feelings around it, and how I connected with people through their animals, like I said. Because like Gretel said, you should never say, I love animals, that's why I'm doing this. For me, my mission statement is, like I just said, helping people through their animals. I'm equally as passionate about helping people as I am about, spaying and neutering and, doing surgery on animals. That's just how I view the vet med world. I think that my tip would be to start early. Like one of my biggest regrets was, I thought the prompt would change every year. So I was waiting for the application to open and I was like, oh, I wonder what prompt it's going to be this year. I don't think it changes at all. So it's going to be something along the lines of, why do you want to be a veterinarian? And I wish I would have started brainstorming sooner. The way that I write is I just get out a Word document and I start writing and then I edit and edit and edit. And I had 2 essays written and, almost near submission quality. And then I deleted them twice. I just started over because I was like, this doesn't feel like me. If your essay feels like you and it exudes your personality, I think that's one of the most important parts. When I talked to LSU admissions, they don't do interviews. So they told me at the APVMA National Symposium, they had a table and they said, one of the most important things that we look at in your application is your essay because we don't do interviews. That's our only chance to get to know you. And I think there's a couple other schools that would probably follow that as well. I know UGA doesn't do interviews. So that's something to think about. If you're applying to school without interviews, this is their chance to get to know you. You can't say, don't repeat your entire experience section of your application in your essay because you only have 500 words. And then the schools that don't interview you, they won't even get to know you. So it's just one way to stand out on your application.
I completely agree. This is your opportunity. Do not write this in 1 week and think it's going to be good enough. And that sounds really harsh, but I had 10 people read this and tear it apart. This is time in your life to be brave because it matters that much. And I applied to a lot of schools with interviews because I knew that that was one of my strengths. So if they offer an interview at a school and you can give a really good interview, because you have to have faith in yourself that you have something to add to the field and that you would make a great veterinarian. If you don't believe that, do the mental work and believe it, because you can. You have made it through all the classes to get to this application cycle. Believe it, you are good enough to be there. And you have to show it in this essay, and you have to show it in your interviews.
Yeah, I know that interviews were one of my strong suits. So whether it was interview or not, I didn't really look at, I don't know why. I thought it was more shocking that some schools just don't do interviews. And I was worried because I was like, well, that's where I usually stand out. So how am I going to get in without an interview? So I was kind of, surprised when I got, again, like LSU surprised me just letting me in with, I didn't feel like I fit their um, applicant, but I guess I did, and that's great. So, like I said, showing your personality in the essay, especially if they don't have interviews, and every interview that I did, I got in. So if that's not a strong suit of yours, maybe that is something you look for. Maybe it is that you go for a no interview school. But anyway, do you have any editing tips to finish off the essay portion of this?
I would say have 10 people read it and not friends. Like, I'm talking advisors, I'm talking veterinarians. If you have a friend's mom or dad who's a teacher, totally have them read it. And just know you could change it a million times. Eventually, you have to make the decision that this is the final draft and I'm happy with it. Don't waste characters at all. I know it would be so great to describe the scene and the wind and the trees that day, but then you're missing out on characters to describe how awesome you are and how great of a vet you would be. Like, prioritize arguing that you need to be there.
Yeah, there's a couple different approaches and just do what speaks to you. I would say definitely get a hook. Don't just say, I grew up here and then I did this and then I did that. They don't, they can see that. So just get into the real stuff quick. Anyway, going on to experience hours, I see a ton of questions about, is this vet experience? Is this research? Is this that? My only advice on that is do what your gut tells you. If you believe that for example, I worked at the Swine Research and Education Center in Auburn, but I classified it as animal hours because I didn't do any of the research. I took care of the animals. But, if I'd helped out with the research, I would have classified that as research. Or maybe you can split it 50-50. It really just depends. Do whatever feels right, but be honest about it. Don't say, I could have said this one unit was vet hours, but there is no on-site veterinarian, so it would have been immoral to do so. So, Gretel, what do you have? Any advice about experience hours, how to log those?
I completely agree with that. Do not lie about your hours. I looked at like my taxes and I did the math of how many hours I worked and I put the exact hours, like 1,056, and that looks way better to them than like saying, oh, I was there 10,000 hours, because I showed that I did the work and I put in like the approximate hours. Don't lie for this. Like, they can tell, and know where you're categorizing things. I had jobs too where I was like cleaning at the hospital, but I wasn't under a vet. So those were animal hours, they weren't vet hours. Animal hours are without a veterinarian. Veterinary hours are with a veterinarian. Now, if you're working with techs all the time, but you're in a veterinary clinic, technically they are overseen by a vet. Techs can't operate without a vet, most. So I would call that organization and ask specifically how to categorize it. Because I've had friends who work in like a wildlife clinic and techs are running it. So I would ask them specifically how you should categorize that. And then there's also categories of animals like large, small, equine, swine. You can click more than one. So say you worked on like a rescue and they had every animal known to man, you can click on multiple of them. Don't worry about separating that. Experiences, fill them out to the best of your ability. Everything in the description, show your knowledge, and then make sure that you're checking everything to make sure you're not missing experiences. Like, Even if you pet sat, you can put that all the way back. Make sure every position you ever had in a club, that's individual. Make sure those are individual experiences. Even veterinary lectures you've attended, you can put. Be creative, because every time you spend with an animal, that adds to your plate. That gives you points in the system. You can also put experiences that are not vet related, and a lot of the times that's quite the advantage, because I know for a fact that they give a ton of points to people who are involved in nonprofits for humans, not nonprofits for animals, or they've worked jobs that show that they're well-rounded. Like McKaylin, I'm sure got a ton of points because her essay was about working at the restaurant and connecting to people. Like, show that you also care about, because veterinary medicine is not just about the animals, and they want to see that.
Yeah, everything that Gretel said and more. Experiences, my number one tip that I always tell people, because, as a PVMA officer, we got questions both in Auburn and at the national level, or even just as an accepted students, people will ask you. And I don't quite understand it, because I'm like, well, I didn't do your experience. What do you feel did you do? Is it research? If you did research, if I had done research at this one facility, I would have marked it as research, but I did not. It's just, what you did. If you feel very strongly that it is, animal experience, not vet, because the vet didn't work directly over you, that's great, do that. As far as the vet versus non-vet, the way that I classified that, because even as a kennel tech, my boss was technically the veterinarian. The way that I set that in my mind is that if there was a veterinarian on site at least, 80% to 90% of the time at my job, then I put it was a vet experience. So my kennel assistant, I did vet experience because my boss was telling me what to do. But the swine unit, we did not have an on-site veterinarian. We just had a call on. So I didn't do that. But that's just an example. You just kind of have to figure that out. Every job is different. Every experience is different. Mark it how you believe it should be marked, within reason. Don't lie. But next up, we are going to talk, or actually, just for a second, did you track your hours using an Excel sheet or anything?
Yes, so I kept a spreadsheet. I'm a type B plus person, is the expression I use. I am not a spreadsheet queen. I'm no master of it. So I had to go back and do a lot of work. I would write my experience in a small blurb on the Excel and like how many hours I was there. But when I went back, I had to do a ton of math and figure it out. So tracking it is the most important thing. Going back in your email too and seeing if you had more animal events, like if you have your pre-vet club's newsletter, go back and read it and try to jot your mind if you were there or not, if you didn't write it down. Write everything down that you can, all the descriptions, save every document from the event, because you can go back, reference it, and then make your application much stronger. Not just like, oh, I went and I caught the baby dairy calf. Like, I used this specific halter and caught them using this flight zone strategy. Like, that's the type of information that they need. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I wish that I had put more of my smaller experiences, because I did keep an Excel sheet. My mom actually started it for me my freshman year of high school. She had she in her iPhone notes app, she would keep track of, the 150 hours that I did volunteering at a local clinic. Because at the time, I didn't have my own computer, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, it doesn't matter, mom. Like, I'll remember in 4 years. No, you won't. I did not know how many hours I worked. But anyway, the other part of that is I started the Excel sheet freshman or sophomore year of college, because I had taken a break from vet med to go to high school and, earn money as a waitress instead, all of that good stuff. But when I did start tracking, I wish I put the small things. I wish I had put, when I went to my reproductive physiology lab and I did a demonstration on how to collect semen. I didn't put that. And I literally grew up on a horse breeding farm, so I knew how to do it. And I felt in my mind that, that wasn't just like anybody could have done that. Like, you could have just walked up and done it. I had been specifically asked to come help with it. And I wish I had put that, even though it was a 30-minute kind of thing. I wish I had put all of the labs that we did for PBMA. I wish I had put so many of those little things, especially for clubs, that I just forgot about. And I worked on it for months, continuously adding things like, oh, I remember this. Oh, I remember that. And I still forgot stuff. Because if you're an involved person, especially if you're in a club that, helps advance your experiences, you're going to forget a lot of those experiences. I did not put that I went to 3 suture labs. I don't know. It didn't occur to me, and I wish I had put that, but I did not. Next up, we're going to talk about letters of recommendations. So you have to submit a minimum of 3. There's a maximum of 6, and your ideal setup, according to, multiple schools, is a vet that you worked for, not a random vet, one that you worked for that has seen you perform, preferably longer than not, but maybe you had a better relationship with somebody you worked with for a year compared to the other one you worked with for 4 years. Whoever can speak the most to you or most about you in a positive way. Your next one should be an academic letter of reference, a professor, an advisor, something like that. And then you should have one work supervisor, whether that's another vet or, for me, I had a high school teacher that I worked for after she had retired, things like that. Like, I'm sure that seemed a little weird to them, but I knew genuinely in my heart that she could speak more about my character and my growth as a person, because I am not the same person I was at 14 years old when she met me. And I have grown so much. And I thought she was a perfect person to talk about what I went through, but in a very professional way. So, do you have any tips, or did you want to share who you asked to be your letter of recommendation?
Definitely. I had a friend this year who didn't get into vet school, and she asked them why. And one of the reasons the vet that she used was like a 2-week international program. And they told her specifically, well, that's good. We would prefer if it was from a clinic that you worked for. So make sure that you have someone, like Michaela said, that you worked for a significant amount of time. If not, even a few months is enough. So I got a letter from 2 vets. Different clinics also help you significantly. Like, don't do 2 from the same clinic. They'd rather just see one really strong one. So I worked for an equine theory genealogist from sophomore year and on, and she was very unique, has a million letters behind her name. That was a very strong letter, and she's known me for years. Like, I've pulled overnights for her. And also, I love Therio. We're both passionate about it. And then another one was a small animal that I worked for that hired me, that's known me for years and years and years, and I love her practice. And I also babysit all of her animals, and I watch her horses, and we go horseback riding together. So people that know you personally. One was a professor that we've worked on multiple projects with, internship together for students to work at an animal sanctuary, a horse sanctuary. So we managed 20 students together for training, met all the time. She had me for multiple classes. She could see that I studied very, very hard. So it's very important to have an academic side, not just a character side, because vet school is very, very hard. They want to make sure that you have a source that can speak to how good of a student you are. And then one was I worked for an animal sanctuary from the age of 16 and on. I adopted a dog and a cat from them. They're like my second parents. I speak the world of them. They could speak the world of me. So those were my letters, and I made sure that they were strong. I sent them all of my information that I could. So all my experiences I sent them. I sent them my resume. I spoke with them specifically about points that they should make, what schools look for in a letter, like showing resilience, strong student, strong applicant, will make a difference and is unique to the field. You have to waive your right to view the letters too. Definitely do that. There are vets who will write bad letters for students, and they have done it. So just waive it and have faith. The way to get a good letter is to know them personally and work hard. And then, exactly, one that has worked with you for longer and knows you better is going to write you a better letter. Now, if you don't have a vet that you're that close with, I would meet them. I would meet with them separately several times. Ask months in advance. I asked in April and in May for my letters that were due in September. And unfortunately, people are very, very busy. You're going to have to be in a weird position where you're reminding them a million times to submit your letter, and you're like, because this is a favor that they're doing for you. I don't know, Michaela, that was very stressful for me.
Yeah, so my specific experience, one of the college, I believe it was Lincoln Memorial University, they had a very specific, you need an academic, you need a supervisor, and you need a vet. I think it was LMU, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, so I followed that formula. And the reason I only did 3 instead of 6 or, the max was because there was a different school that I'm not remembering which one right now, but they said if you submit more than 3, we are going to randomly select which 3 we read. And that really bothered me. Not anything against the school. I wouldn't want to read 6 letters per applicant either. But it bothered me because I was like, what if they happen to select the person that knows me a little bit less, but, happen to be a vet? So there was a vet that I worked with when I was 14 as a volunteer, and he knew my family very, very well, but I feel like he didn't know me and couldn't speak to my character so much as my family's. And because it had been so long, I hadn't been there for 6 years, that I didn't feel comfortable asking him to do that, even though he knew me or my family closely and I worked with him, and I worked with him longer than the vet I did ask. It just didn't feel right. There was a lot of my supplemental essays that asked about DEI, being able to work with people from different backgrounds. And I had a lot of experience growing up in a town where, it was mostly a different culture. I was the odd one out. And, I continued that characteristic of myself going through all of my undergrad working with vets of different backgrounds, especially at Auburn. I worked with a couple from Brazil. I worked with a couple from Taiwan. I worked with some from all over the place. And I got to speak about how much I loved meeting people of all different walks of life. So I thought that that was a big key aspect that I thought I was, passionate about in showing in my letters. So I asked a vet that I'd worked with for, I can't remember if it was 6 to 8 months at the time that I had asked her. By the time that I graduated, I worked with her for year and a half, almost 2 years. But when I asked her, it was like 8 months, I think. And she wrote an amazing letter. She let me read it, even though I'd waived my rights on the application. She was like, I really, really want you to read it. Like, I'm so upset. Like, if I did it wrong, like, let me know. And I was like, no, it's okay. So if they really feel that you should read it, that's your own moral discussion. So that was something that I wanted to show, but she was able to speak to my ability to work with every doctor in that practice because fortunately we had a lot of residents from out of the country, out of the state, all of that. And she said how welcoming and how, amazing I was at teaching the 4th year vet students how to do certain procedures and my passion for education, just so many things. And she did such an amazing job. I can't say enough good things. So that was one of my decisions, is I had to prioritize what she could say about me and how she knew my character over how long I worked with somebody or their credentials. Anyway, my next one was my high school ag teacher. You shouldn't really bring in somebody that was a high school teacher, but she only was my teacher for a semester before she went somewhere else. So we had continued our relationship past that. I worked for her, I worked with her children, I worked with her pets, I worked with her animals, and that was more of the experience she talked about. And she just happened to be my high school teacher. So that's why I chose her. She could speak to my growth throughout the past, 6 to 8 years. And then my third one was high up in the animal science department at Auburn. And I'd had multiple classes with her. She was one of those people that I considered doing, not only because she could speak so highly of me, but also she had all the extra letters on her name, all of the extra, like she's a very reputable source. She's again, like Gretel said, she had written tons of letters of recommendation, and she is not the kind of person to say yes to everybody. If she cannot write you a good letter, she will not write it. She told me, she only does something like 3 a year, and I feel very blessed for her to, do that. One of the biggest conversations is, especially if you're not currently working with them, how do you ask them? I felt so nervous asking all 3 of even though they all knew me very well and they would write me a letter of recommendation. The basic conversation about how to ask is very nerve-wracking. Do whatever you feel is best. I know, the high school teacher I talked about, obviously she did not live in Auburn. She lived in Texas. And so I was close enough to her that I just gave her a phone call and then I texted her about it afterward. And I emailed her, but I would email them your CV, preferably if you have one, which is a curriculum vitae, and it says it's like a extended version of a resume, and they'll get to know more about every experience you did because they might not know everything. Anyway, but you could also just email them a 1-page resume and they can hit a key point or two. But I know that my academic reference letter preferred my CV, and she wanted to talk about the things that I had done and when I did it. I didn't read her essay. I had waived my rights to read it, so I have no idea what she wrote about, but it worked. And then I also sent it to my veterinarian, and that seemed to help them a lot. They all felt a little bit more at ease. Even though they knew me, they did not know all of my extracurricular activities, if that makes sense. So next up, we're going to talk about supplemental essays, and a quick disclaimer, we're not going to talk about any specific ones. We don't know if it's the same ones this year anyway. We're just going to give some general descriptions of values that somebody might look for, some tips on what, to write about. Like Gretel has mentioned in the past, if you're applying to a certain school and you're not quite sure what they're looking for in their essay, go to their website, look at their mission statements, see what they really value and they're looking for. Some of it say it in the question. I know some of the ones I wrote about were, tell me about how you feel, or not how you feel, but what are some things you've done to improve diversity in the veterinary field. Just things like that. There's certain values that they're going to be hinting at. Some of them talk about integrity. Do you have any tips on your supplemental essays, Gretel?
Oh, definitely. I think this is when you can hit points that you might not have been able to really describe in your experiences section. Like, don't repeat your experiences section. This is time for you to get more personal and show your values. So, I described my work in the women's nonprofit that I've worked for the last 5 years. And that showed a different side of me because I was constantly working with people. And working with people makes you stand out. So in those sections, use them to your advantage to talk about very unique experiences that show your values, and make sure that you have other people read it too. So your supplementals, they're a lot of work. They're short, but they're a lot of work. It's a lot to say without a lot of text. So have people check them for sure.
Yeah, my advice would be to start early. That applies to everything about this application. Start from day one. You can't access the supplemental questions until May 9th, but at this point it would be open. The earlier the better. I understand all of us have busy summers, all of us have busy school years, but you have to carve out some time to work on it. I know a couple people that waited until August to start on it and they gave up. They were like, it's too much. I can't get this done in 2 to 3 weeks, because you can't. You're going to say, oh, I wish I would have put this. Even I did, and I opened it in January and worked on it every week until August when I submitted it. And I still forgot some stuff. That's just how it is. And you're going to want to have more time than less time. That's just the truth. You shouldn't start an essay the day it's due for school. It's possible, but you shouldn't. My supplemental essays, I focused on a concrete example. Like Gretel said, she would mention the woman's nonprofit. But for me, it just depends on the question. I didn't have one specific thing I tied into it, depending on the value they were looking for. A lot of times I tied back, or because that is my main passion. And it's a little bit redundant to say the same thing in your main essay as you do your supplemental essays, but if you can completely rephrase it and make it almost a different value, but with the same type of experience, if that makes sense. So if I did my main essay on wanting to go into rural practice, and then I had a question about diversity, I might use an example where diversity and, different cultures played into a real life example of vet med, or even just a customer conflict, something like that. It just depends. If it was an integrity thing, I might say nothing about the rural aspect of my application. It just depends. I don't know what the application questions are this year, but just do what feels true to your heart. The same thing as your main essay. The thing about these applications is that they're so vague to give you the freedom to say what you feel fits. They don't want to tie you into like a tiny little box. They're going to give you, a couple mile wide box and say, just give me something. Let me know about you. Um, Going on, we are going to talk about two quick little points on the transcripts because we already did cover them. But something to note is that it's very expensive. The more schools you apply to, the more expensive it gets. There's a $100 to $250 fee just to apply to the school, plus any supplemental fees that they might have. Like I know there was a school last year that, you paid the $150 or $200 to add it to your VMCAS total, and then you also have to check out $60 to $80 on their website for I don't know what, but it's just something to consider if you have financial boundaries. And that being said, there are fee waivers for the applications. I don't know exactly how it worked, but I would 100% look into it could be either on the AAVMC website or the VMCAS website on how to do that, because it is very helpful.
Say most important thing about the transcripts, get it verified weeks in advance. In weeks. Like, if you're a procrastinator like I am, pretend to not be a procrastinator. Go to the library, sit down, go in that element that makes you productive. Like, go where you are productive. Or get someone to take your phone from you and sit across the table with you and work on it together. Do everything you can, because you matter so much in this that you need to get this done. Like, give yourself the self-respect to give yourself enough time to write an amazing application, because if you don't believe you're good enough, you're not going to put in the time that it needs.
Yeah, I agree with Gretel. If it takes somebody literally snatching your phone out of your hands and saying, sit down and work on it, it's 11 p.m. on a Thursday, you need to carve out some time because you haven't touched it. I did see a trick that I kind of want to try once vet school starts, and maybe it helps out, maybe it doesn't, but apparently you can turn your phone on grayscale and it like reduces the dopamine from scrolling or whatever you want to phrase that as. But I think I'll be trying that because that sounds fun. It's like even if I do get on a short form content app, then it'll be like watching like a 1950s movie. Like maybe it won't help at all. But anyway, that's just a fun tip that I saw that I wanted to share. And then we'll be moving on to, so you finished your transcripts, they've been verified, you're completely submitted. Now what? At this point, it's probably August or September if you're the average person. I think I submitted mine early August and was done by mid August because I couldn't sit there and stare at it anymore. I got to a point where I was like, I can't, like, this is so stressful. School's starting again. I need to get it submitted and out of my face, or else I'm just going to worry and worry and worry. So the thing about the process is there was a lot of tears, like, not because of the process itself necessarily. It wasn't that it was that intense. It's intense, but that's why you break it up from January to August. You have a long time as long as you make the time. And if it takes you up until the last 2 weeks to get verified, then it does. But you shouldn't stress yourself out too much over the application itself. I was stressed out about, bigger problems. Like, what if I never get in anytime in the future? Like, what do I do? What am I going to apply to a master's program? Like, those are things you could consider. I really genuinely did not think I was going to get in this year. And so I was looking at master's programs because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go get a master's in ag education. That was my backup plan. And so it's not if you feel you won't get in. That was my personal experience. But regardless of that, you should always have some general backup plan. It's a year in advance of you graduating, probably, if you're the traditional applicant. If not, it's still a year in advance of whatever you need to learn next, because a lot of schools won't tell you if you were accepted or denied until, it could be January. It just depends on the school, but it can get really, really frustrating. All the uncertainty, all the waiting. That's what bothered me, was the uncertainty of, I am graduating college this year and I have no plan for my future. I don't know what state, what country, what job, nothing. And that's what bothered me. So my way of coping with that was, I'm going to go look at master's programs, create an extensive planned backup plan so that I won't be as stressed about it if it doesn't work out. That was my way of coping with it. Gretel, did you do anything specific once you submitted your application to calm your nerves a little bit and wait on what's next?
I celebrated because I think even getting to the point where you made it through all of those incredibly difficult classes where you could apply is a victory. Acceptance rates for in-state are between 20 and 30% for the most part, sometimes lower. Out of state, normally it's under 10%. The range is mostly 2 to 5%. So realistically, odds are slim, but that doesn't mean forever. There is so much you can do to build your application, say even if it doesn't work out the first time. I talked about like a backup plan because I always want to be involved with animals and educating myself on it and understanding that this is a journey and that there's so much in life we will learn. Those were like the biggest points that gave me a lot of peace because I was like, I'm gonna be in that world somehow, whether it's in vet school this year or not. And if not, there is so much to do. There are so many amazing opportunities that exist. Like, maybe I would have gone to Europe for a year. Who knows? Worked under a professor. If you feel hopeless, start looking for other opportunities that exist in the world, like Michaela said. And then you're just like, it's another year of my life, right? It's not the biggest deal in the world. Like, give yourself some grace. It's not the end of the world if you don't get in the first time, or if you get waitlisted and you have to wait. Like, that was what made me feel okay with all the waiting, because I'm like, it's going to work out.
Yeah, I use the phrase a lot when I talk to people about, I know before I graduated in the spring, there were so many people talking to me about how worried they were they weren't going to get in. And they were asking me straight up, they're like, how do you get in? And I was like, it's different for everybody. First off, whole different conversation. So don't ask me because I don't have an answer. I just put my life, my truth, and if they like it, they like it. If they don't, I'll try again. But I told them, for many, many people, it's not if, it's when. If it takes 3 cycles, if it takes 4 cycles, if you're 28 and you get in because you took 5 years off to raise a family, it is all so unique to you. Vet schools don't really care if you're 20 or 30. It's more about your experiences, your passion, your life. So if it takes 1 extra year, God forbid, like, take a little bit. Some people say that their gap year was the best year and the best decision that they could have made. I personally think I would have loved a gap year. It would have been awesome. I'm equally happy to do both. Equally happy. Of course, I am so grateful that I had the opportunity to not get a gap year, but it also would have been so fun to take a break almost and work on myself and on my, mental health, things like that. Not that it gets very, bad in that waiting period, but I'm just saying it would have been nice to take some time for myself, pursue things that I was passionate about. I would have started painting again and selling artwork. I would have gotten a job. I would have raised some money for myself before putting myself into a financial hole. There's so many opportunities in a gap year, and I don't think that it can be, overrated enough. Everything will work out one way or another. You might get into a gap year, get into a job, and you're like, you know what? I don't want to go to vet school. I love this job. Might be completely different. But yeah, so everybody's going to handle it differently, that waiting period. For me, I had to solidify a backup plan and literally start applying to master's programs before I felt like, okay, I just need to take a minute and realize that it's going to work out, because I did have a lot of anxiety about it. And as far as your actual, what you do while you wait, do you work? Do you shadow? Do you volunteer? Do you relax? Again, totally up to you. If you do your file reviews and they say you were completely lacking in your academic, maybe you get 1 or 2 of your classes retaken. Maybe you pursue a master's. Maybe, they say you didn't have enough experience hours and you want to apply again, get a job at a clinic. It's different for everybody. There's no one right answer. I see people ask, should I do this or that? What do you want to do? What do you think would benefit you the most?
Don't do nothing. Because when you get there, some school supplementals actually open after the September date, and they're going to have you write about what you've been doing that fall. So never stop. Don't be like, oh great, I get to stop now that I've submitted everything. Absolutely not true. You should be wanting to be working. You'd have to pay me to stay home and not be in a vet clinic is how much I love it. Or out with my horses. Do something in that time that is unique as well. Because you never know. You never ever know. Keep building yourself up.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like I said, do what benefits you the most. And if you decide to reapply, do what benefits your application the most as well. If it's a toxic environment and you don't want to be there, find something else. You don't have to stay tied down to one thing. It's just another thing to add to your application next year. Whether it was a clinic experience that didn't work out, add it. Even if you say, oh, my vet would not, write me a letter of rec, it is still a valuable experience. I had that exact situation where I was like, I'm not necessarily going to ask them for a letter of rec, but I did it. I did that work. I went in, I worked my butt off. I hated it. I found a different clinic that worked out much better. And, it all works out. Put it in your application. So another question is, when and how do you follow up with schools? I did not personally do that, because to me, it just didn't, I don't know. There's a couple of different opinions on that. I genuinely don't know if they even read those emails. I don't know if it actually affects anything that they do. If you want to express your gratitude and say, thank you so much for, meeting with me to interview, do so. The schools that I had gotten interviewed at, I did not feel very strongly about them. And so I did not do that, because I'd also already been accepted somewhere else. I don't know. Emailing a general admissions email, admissions at blakecollege.edu, did not feel very personal to me. So I did not think that I would send a personalized email, because I don't know who that's going to be honest. That was my decision. Did you send anything to your colleges, Gretel?
I sent questions to them about transcripts, and they always answered for the most part. When offers came around and they said accepted, I always replied and I thanked them for making my dreams come true, because it was so special to me. I mean, Ohio State had, I think, close to 4,000, and then they picked 160, and I was one of them. I thanked them. And when I had to turn schools down, I wrote them again and I thanked them for everything, because they gave me a chance. But not everyone has to do that, and some vet schools will not reply to you. Don't take it personally. Either they have thousands of emails coming to them. That's just what made me feel better in my heart, but I don't think you necessarily need to do it. Don't email them when you've submitted your VMCAS and be like, did you get it? Because that is through a separate system. That doesn't work that way.
Yeah, no, I would never email a vet school and say, are you done with it? Have you looked at it? Did you read my essay? Nothing like that. If I were them, I'd be like, I don't know if this is going to work out personally, but I'm not them. Maybe they'll love it. Who knows? But anyway, I do remember, if I ever received a specific email or a person that reached out to me for admissions, I would email back and forth with them, and I would say, oh, thank you for this, thank you for that. I know one of LSU's representatives, I emailed back and forth with my transcript. I had an issue with my transcript, all of this sort of stuff. I did contact them and I said thank you, and I, made sure that I stayed in contact. But the ones I was rejected from, I never reached out to. I never said, thank you for this, thank you for that. Because if I didn't get an interview, they have 4,000 other people that they could have gotten a thank you for looking.
Yeah. I did
Yeah.
not contact the ones that rejected me. No.
Yes.
I was grieving it. I was not wanting to talk.
No, no, that's if you feel in your heart that you should do that. But I don't know. That everybody has their own personal opinion on that. And there's no right or wrong answer. Do what you think is best. But as far as when you're accepted, I think that it would be nice to get a thank you letter if you have a specific contact. That was my thing. If they sent me a specific contact of a person, and especially if they interviewed me, if they were one of the people that interviewed me, I was like, oh my God, thank you. But if I just have to email the general admissions and I don't know. Like, I just didn't feel too passionately about that. And yeah. So, all right, are you ready to end this?
Yes. So, thank you all for your time today. We know this is a longer episode, but I really feel like I wish I had known these things, and I hope they give you peace and food for thought. Just remember, this is a journey. You will end up there. And just even getting to the point of applying is a huge deal. It's all going to work out.
Yes, especially at this point in the application cycle, you're probably a good bit in. And if you're not, it is not too late to start. Do not give up. You are at a perfect timeline to get started and really hit home. So, yeah, good luck, everybody, on your application cycles. I hope everybody gets into their dream school, or at least a school, and y'all have fun. Signing off, Gretel and Michaelan from the Vet Files. Thank you.